Hey there, welcome back to that discount rack at your local toy store. I'm your host. I'm sorry, he's your host.
That's right, it's the Star-Spangled Man with a Plan. And today we're going to be customizing a figure to look like me.
For this project, I used all of the materials that you see here, and it took me roughly 10.5 hours. Boy, the accuracy for these figures sure is top-notch.
Avengers, assemble! I am Captain America.
It's wrestling time!
What? Okay, so maybe not accuracy, but the quality of what you get sure is great, right? And just look at Cap's giant stupid arm. Everybody remembers that from the movie. Okay, I'm done with the sarcasm. I truly do appreciate the pristine craftsmanship that went into painting these eyes. They didn't call him Steve Lazy Eyes Rogers for nothing. Okay, now I'm done with the sarcasm. If you're new here, you haven't heard me complain yet about how crappy some of the quality is of these Titan Hero series figures. And if you aren't new here, then you know what I'm talking about. Part of the charm to this series of figures is figuring out what works and what doesn't, and then to showcase what works while literally sometimes cutting away what doesn't. For instance, these arms. Now it just so happens that I had an extra Captain America figure sitting in the storage area where I keep a lot of my future projects. And it just so happens that I like his arms better than the ones on this one. So, just like a psychotic madman hell-bent on creating a new creature, I'm channeling my inner Frankenstein by attaching extraneous limbs to breathe some life into this otherwise lifeless husk. So basically I cut the arms off the other figure and I'm going to glue them onto this one. But also I'm going to pose the legs. And to do that, as you've already seen, I had to cut into this figure using a cutting wheel on my rotary carver. And to form and bend some of the pieces into place, I had to use the hairdryer here to heat them up. I used some super glue to attach the arms into place and then reinforced it with some masking tape, all while being watched over by the approving yet lazy-eyed gaze of the sacrificial figure. Sorry buddy, I'll find another use for you. Though for now, what I'm going to do is fill in all of the cracks and crevices with some modeling clay. And yes, this is the same modeling clay that I used when I customized the Thor action figure a few months ago. Though what I'm doing with this figure is way more substantial. You see, I glued both of his arms and both of his legs into fixed positions, and I'm filling in all of the surrounding areas with clay to make it look like a solid piece. By the end of this, my hope was that this figure would be less of an action figure and more of a statue. After allowing the clay to dry, I used a steel wool pad to sand everything down so it was flush with the existing plastic. Then I cleaned away all of the dust and it was time to start molding. This was, without a doubt, the most challenging part of this project. But also, it was the most fun. I started with the forearms, spreading the clay out and adding some small details like the suit padding and armor. To do this, I used an assortment of clay carving tools. The most difficult part of this process was to make it appear as though there were multiple layers to the suit, which I have to admit that I didn't completely achieve that, but I am very happy with the results that I got. I know I talked quite a bit about it in the Thor video, but I do really enjoy working with this modeling clay. Throughout this project, I had only one instance of a crack showing up due to shrinking. The stuff stays pliable and workable for a long time, which is really nice. And even when it's completely dry, it has a little bit of flexibility to it, so you don't have to worry about it cracking or crumbling, which is also nice. One detail that I was sure to add was extra straps on the boots. The costume seen in the movie has 3 straps per boot, while the figure only has 1. So it was actually pretty fun to replicate them. I just had to apply a thin strip of clay and then trim it and shape it, and then add all of the details. In any spots where I had too much clay, I just trimmed it away with the X-Acto knife. This set of clay carving tools was a cheap one, but they do the trick. Applying a ribbing effect to the strap really added to it, at least in my opinion. It really looks out of place right now, but trust me, after I add some paint, it's going to look like it's always been there. And here you can see that I repeated the same process 3 more times to add the other straps as well. I was unable to get good footage of it, but I modified the back as well. I applied 1 coat of black primer to the entire figure, and then added 1 coat of the navy blue spray paint. One thing you'll notice if you look closely at Captain America's suit is that it is made up of a variety of different materials, so I added some flat blue paint in different areas to try to replicate that. Then I switched to painting the boots. I started out with a really dark brown for the base. One strange thing about this paint was that it was supposed to be flat, but when it dried it had a very glossy sheen, and I'm not sure why. But anyway, I switched over to this rust-colored paint and filled in some of the other details like the belt and the straps here. And like I said before, applying paint to these added straps makes it look like they've been there the entire time. I even painted the back of the belt, which is something that the manufacturer didn't do with the original figure. Then I painted in all of the shield harness straps on both the back and the front before switching over to doing the gloves. Just like the main suit itself, all of these brown areas have multiple layers to them. I used a slightly lighter shade of brown to add some extra details to both the harness and the belt. Next, it was time to add some stripes. To achieve the correct shade of red, I had to mix multiple colors together. I started with the red by adding the stripes on the arms, and then added all the stripes to the torso next. I do have to give credit to the manufacturer on one thing. They did a really good job with the mold of this figure. Well, at least most of it anyway. Next, I made a slightly less than pure white color, and then painted all of the white stripes in. Once the stripes were finished, I filled in the silver star emblem on his chest, and then added all of the other silver details to the suit as well. This next part was a bit tricky, making skin tone. As you can see, I had to add a few different colors together. It took a bit of trial and error, but once I was happy with the correct tone, I painted the neck and the fingers. And with that, all of the main painting on the main figure was complete, which meant that now it was time to start weathering. For the dirt and grime, I just combined 2 different shades of shoe polish, black and brown. Then I applied it over the entire figure and wiped away all of the excess. Once the shoe polish process was complete, I dry brushed over the entire figure using the original shades of paint. And for all the brown areas, I used some lighter shades of brown to accentuate the weathering effect. And with that, the weathering was done. And then I switched over to my least favorite part of this project, or any project like this, the head. And that's because of the eyes. I hate doing the eyes. At least I used to hate doing the eyes. But you'll see why that changes here in a moment. As you can see, I'm repeating the same process on the head that I did on the body, adding all of the blues and the browns in the right areas. Remember that flesh tone paint that I mixed up a little bit ago? Well, luckily I made quite a bit. Enough so, in fact, that I was able to fill up an empty paint bottle about 1/3 of the way, so at least I'll have more for next time. After the skin was completed, I added all the silver details to the head as well. And once the main areas were filled in with silver, I added some dry brushing effects to it also. And then it was time to start the eyes. First, I painted in the whites of the eyes, and then I mixed up a bit of color for his baby blues. And here is why I don't hate painting eyes anymore. Thanks to a helpful tip from a very nice person in the comments section, and thanks to a great suggestion by my friend Ben, I have found that using the combination of the tip of a toothpick and the tip of a sewing needle makes painting the eyes infinitely easier. Next up, the shield. My initial plan was to use the shield that came with the figure, and the first thing that I wanted to do was to shape it correctly, because this thing was way too flat. However, I couldn't get good results, so I decided to make my own, and this was a multi-step process. The first step was to copy the mold of the original shield, which I accomplished by spreading out and pressing the clay into the embossed areas. Then I had to allow this piece to dry. Once that piece was dry, I spread out another piece of clay onto a ball. Once I had that piece in place, I used the other piece that I made as a stamp. One thing that I didn't mention is that I sprayed multiple coats of a gloss clear coat onto that other piece as well, to prevent the clay from sticking to it. Then once this piece was dry, I used the cutting wheel to get it down to its correct size. Now since I'm making this figure look like the Captain America that we see in the giant battle toward the end of Endgame, I'm making the shield look all battle damaged like it had pieces broken away from it. Now one thing that happened for some odd reason is all of the footage of me spray painting the shield disappeared. But basically all I did was first spray it with a coat of the black primer, and then add 1 coat of chrome silver tester's spray paint. Then once that was dry, I switched over to hand painting. Speaking of which, I added a small amount of silver pigment powder to give the paint a metallic look. Now back to talking about the shield itself. Since I did save that shield stamp thingy, that piece, you know what I'm talking about, I may use it to make a fully intact shield at some point. But I'm gonna go with this one for now. I'm just adding a healthy amount of weathering and battle damage here. Now, to attach this shield onto Cap's arm, I had masked off a couple areas on the inside of the shield. I'm going to cut 2 pieces off this necklace cord and then attach them into place using super glue. Unfortunately, it was very difficult to film that at a usable angle. Sorry. You know, I think Cap needs something to hold in his other hand too, don't you? Yeah, that'll do it. For the record, that is hands down the best movie moment that I have ever experienced at a theater. The entire place just erupted into cheering, which was just awesome. Anywho, let's make a little Mjolnir for Cap here. For the hammerhead, I'm using a scrap piece of basswood. And without a reference point, it's kind of difficult to get it to the correct shape and size. Oh, look at that. I happen to have one. By the way, if you're new here, then after this video's over, you should go check out how I made that. But for now, I'll show you how I make this little itty-bitty mini Mjolnir. After getting it to the correct shape and size, I drilled a small hole and then installed a nail for the handle. I also shaped and cut a small sliver for a disc to attach to the top. For the handle, I used a nail as the core and then wrapped it with clay to add all of the details. This part was both tedious and quite delicate. I once again used an assortment of the clay carving tools to first add a thick band at the base of the hammerhead and then add the trim rings to the length of the handle. Once the trim rings were all formed, I added the extra details to the base of the handle. Then I switched over to adding details to the hammerhead itself. In addition to an assortment of lines carved into the hammerhead, I carved some designs into the ends also. Now, granted, these designs aren't as intricate as the ones that were carved into the larger Mjolnir, but then again, this thing is a lot smaller, so I didn't think that was really necessary. Also, I used my normal process of spraying it with black primer and then the chrome silver tester spray paint, before of course weathering it with shoe polish and then polishing it with some powdered graphite, then painting in all the brown areas on the handle. For the leather strap, I used a thin piece of the necklace cord, which I slightly flattened using a hammerhead. Then I drilled a couple of shallow holes in the base of the handle, then glued the leather strap into place. And just like that, this mini Mjolnir was complete, and so was everything else. I am extremely pleased with the results that I got. And while it is not anywhere near perfect, this figure looks and feels like a premium collectible, and I couldn't be happier with it. This was a fun, challenging project that really pushed me to want to try and increase my level of quality in my craftsmanship. Hand making these little props was a really cool process, and I can't wait to do it again. This figure took a lot of time and effort, but I'm really glad that I invested in it because I think the results speak for themselves. And I know I had some numerous, though pretty legitimate complaints about this series of figures and their lack of quality. I really do have to give them credit on the sometimes great job that they do with the molds. One thing I was expecting more of a challenge on was attaching the shield to his arm, but gluing those little pieces of necklace cord into place couldn't have been easier. And though it's far from the most elegant solution, it's the best idea I could come up with. And it works, so that's great. While there are a few things that I would like to improve upon when customizing the next figure, that's all part of the learning process. And overall, I'm thrilled with how this guy turned out. It's certainly a big difference from what he looked like before. Boy, I'll tell you, I just love how this little guy turned out. This project really pushed me to... Never mind. Here you go.
Thank you. Yes, I'll tell you what, I couldn't be happier with how the likeness of this little miniaturized version of me looks. He really did a bang-up job. America thanks you. Well, I'd say that does it for this week's video. Please be sure to like and subscribe below. Maybe ring that bell, share it with someone, and leave a comment.
Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.